Oregon picks second in the preseason Big Ten media poll. I think that's the perfect spot.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks, which is why, if you have not already, please like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to, but FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something every day for everyone all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. I'll talk about why Oregon going 12-0 is completely within the realm of possibility this year, and some recruiting buzz or lack thereof, and how we should feel about the whole Trey McNutt situation right now for those that follow recruiting. But starting today with the Big Ten preseason media poll. Big Ten Media Days start later today as this show comes out Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Oregon is up later in the week. If you want any questions asked to Dan Lanning or any of Dillon Gabriel, Jeff Bosser, Terrence Ferguson, send them to me, and hopefully I'll be able to ask those fine gentlemen some questions. But the media have picked them to be second in their first season in the Big Ten, and there are a couple reasons why I think this is the ideal spot for Oregon to be. Number one, perception-wise, maybe I care about this more than others because I'm in the podcast and media space. I think Oregon being picked second helps set the expectations exactly right. And I also think it's a fair reaction from the Big Ten media members who, at different conferences can be very guarded with their leagues when they have these new members. And I saw this last week at SEC Media Days quite a bit, but in the reverse, Media Days took place in Dallas. And before Texas and Steve Sarkisian took the stage, everybody got questions about Texas. There were some about Oklahoma. There were a lot of questions about Texas. Everybody wanted to know, how are you going to deal with Texas? What about Texas on the recruiting? There was a lot of Texas stuff in there because people can be very guarded, right? It was in Dallas, so it's a hub for Longhorn fans. Of course, it's not in Austin itself, but still a lot of Texas media members there. And so when I looked at the Big Ten preseason media poll, Ohio State and Oregon were the only schools to get first place votes. Ohio State had 21 and Oregon had 6. I was not one of the people voting in that particular poll. And I think Oregon having 6 to Ohio State's 21, that might be a little bit wider of a gap than I think there should be, especially given Oregon's schedule, which I'll talk about later in the show. But I think it's the right place for Oregon to be because when you have a conference that's introducing a new school or a new team like Oregon, I think an element of, if you want to come in and, win the conference, you got to prove it. We're not going to just expect you to come in and just suddenly take over a league that is known for having, its own traditions and styles and caliber of teams compared to the league that Oregon is coming from. I think that's completely fair. So I think that's why it's right, number one. Number two, I think being picked as a preseason favorite would have set the expectations incredibly high. Is Oregon capable of achieving that level of play this year in the Big Ten? Yes. Yes, they absolutely are. Would you want to go into a new league as the preseason favorite, though? I think that would almost set the expectations too high. Now, do we probably pay attention to that more than Dan Lanning or any of his players would ever publicly say they do? Yes. But in the fan and media space, is it better to have Oregon be the preseason number 2 rather than the preseason number 1? Yes. Yes, I absolutely think so. And I think it's the right place for Oregon to want to be in that sense of not putting all the pressure on this team's shoulders, not expecting to come in, you were supposed to win it this year, like staying away from that. I think that is good for fans. But number 3, I think team-wise, it's a really great recognition for Oregon to come into a conference that certainly has media members and fans and teams and coaches and whatnot. This is just the media poll that are familiar with Oregon, and they've seen the Ducks play in the years in non-conference games like 2021 or Rose Bowls like 2020. Like Oregon's actually had a good run of success against Big Ten teams lately and in Rose Bowl games, not named Ohio State, who they of course beat in 2021. So I think they're familiar. I think they're giving Oregon the respect that they deserve with the offseason that they have had, with what Dan Lanning did a year ago, and everything they have coming into this season. And when I look at the rest of the teams in the Big Ten, there is not one that, if I were voting in this particular poll, I would put above Oregon. That includes Michigan, who have lost their quarterback, their head coach, and 18 players total to the NFL draft. Now, did Oregon lose a lot? Yep, they lost 8. They had 8 players get drafted. Michigan had 18. And Oregon's got a bunch of key returners as well. Guys like Jordan Birch or Jeff Basso or Tez Johnson, who I would be shocked if he's not on the preseason All Big Ten team. I don't think the Big Ten media preseason teams are out just yet. That might get decided later this week. That's how the SEC did it. I did see one preseason assessment from, I think it was the Indy Star, that had Tez Johnson as a preseason first team receiver. That's deserves. I mean, he deserves that level of recognition. But I think for Oregon, they've got at least the second best roster in the Big Ten going into this year. And you combine that with a third-year head coach who has never won fewer than 10 games over the course of an entire season, factoring in bowl games. Of course, 2022 was a 9-3 campaign. And a quarterback who is probably going to be better than everybody he plays this year. Now, there are guys who might have better individual games. Is there a quarterback in the Big Ten on Oregon's schedule that's going to have a better individual season statistically than Dillon Gabriel? I don't know who that's going to be. There are guys that have the sort of upward momentum in their careers down the line that could allow them to produce at the same sort of level. But Gabriel's going into year 5, 6. I mean, we've all lost track at this point. He's going to break Bo Nix's record for, assuming he stays healthy, knock on wood. And that was a good crisp knock here on my hotel desk. Assuming he stays healthy, he'll break Bo Nix's record for the most starts ever in college football, and he's probably going to be around 4,000 yards, 70% completion. I look around the Big Ten, I don't see a lot of guys that this year can have a season like that. So I think Oregon getting that level of respect is an encouraging thing to see, that people who are, not following Oregon necessarily as closely, or who are not as emotionally invested, are a little bit more objective, are seeing what a lot of us are seeing, which is this is going to be a very good football team. And this is going to be an exciting first year in the Big Ten with several marquee games, most notably October 12th against Ohio State. The winner of that game could very well end up going undefeated. Now, Oregon has to go to Michigan. Ohio State hosts Michigan. That makes the Buckeyes more likely to beat the Wolverines this year. I think both ultimately will. And the winner of that game, you just look at the rest of their schedule, you kind of go, boy, I don't see a ton on there. I just don't see a ton where you're going to be able to match, the quarterback level or the roster level, or just kind of where the program is at and the head coaching gaps. I don't think they're really going to be there. They might even be there most of the time in favor of Oregon and Ohio State. Talk about that more coming up next, why Oregon can absolutely go 12-0 here in 2024. But let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments, or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter, at @McLaughlinCFB, or at Locked On Ducks. More coming your way right after FanDuel. That's right. I love sports. All sports. Mostly all sports. And I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And you can do the same thing this summer. FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. They've got bets for Oregon, whether that's the Washington game, Oregon a big favorite, Michigan game, Oregon a small favorite, Ohio State game, Oregon a slight underdog. Everything you want, win total, national title, Big Ten championship odds, it's all over there. So go check out FanDuel. Head over to FanDuel.com. Start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So Oregon's schedule allows for the realistic possibility of going 12-0, which has only happened one single solitary time. That was back in 2010 when Oregon was in the Pac-12. And I'll explain more in just a moment. But for those who don't have Oregon's schedule memorized, like myself, I think I could do it off the top of my head, but I've got it right in front of me just in case. Idaho is game 1, August 31st. Do you realize how close that is? We're in the end of July. August 31st, game 1, Autzen Stadium, Idaho. That's a win. That game on Big Ten Network. Ew. Okay. Week 2, at home, Boise State, preseason Mountain West favorites, and a perennial thorn in Oregon's side at Autzen Stadium. That game's on Peacock, by the way. And then you follow with Oregon State, who Oregon blasted 31-7 at Autzen last year. They go to Reser, where they haven't won in 6 years. Granted, they only play there every other year, of course, but 0-2 in their last 2 trips to Reser Stadium. Should have won both those games. Did not. This one, though, is going to have a more sizable roster difference because Oregon State lost a lot. Their head coach, quarterback, running backs, offensive, they lost it all. They've replaced it okay. Ducks will be a big favorite. That game on Fox looks like they're a 20.5-point favorite, according to ESPN. So then you get into Big Ten play, and a classic Big Ten matchup, Oregon at UCLA. Host Michigan State, then the Ohio State game, which is in Eugene. Then they go at Purdue, classic trap game. Host Illinois, at Michigan, Maryland at home, at Wisconsin, bye, and then host Washington. Now, one of the reasons that I got to thinking about whether Oregon could go 12-0 is how close was Oregon to going undefeated a year ago in the regular season? Everyone just kind of remembers what happened at the end of the year and how much the losses stood out because Oregon didn't win the national championship. How close were they, really, to going undefeated? The answer is intensely close. Perhaps, arguably, a missed field goal away. If Oregon completes that drive and the field goal goes through and they go to overtime, who would you rather be? Because think about it if the shoe was on the other foot. If Oregon had gone down and taken the lead with under 2 minutes to go and Washington had gone down and tied the game and sent it to overtime, whether you're at home or on the road, which team do you want to be? Who feels better going into overtime there? Again, doesn't guarantee anything, but we all remember the decisions in that game, not kicking a field goal on a couple different red zone trips, not executing well, couldn't get it right, all those sorts of things. It was that close. And that's the only real game where Oregon faced a major threat. I mean, you go up and down their schedule. Texas Tech was a major threat as well early in the season on the road. But then Oregon kind of breezed through most of the rest of their schedule. Colorado, yeah, that was not close. USC won by double digits. Florida State, or not Florida State, Washington State. I don't know why I said Florida State. That was a weird Freudian slip. Washington State, slow start, but again, won the game comfortably by the end of it. Cal, again, a slow start, a little, kind of, the weather was bad, and Oregon won the game by 40 points, and then there was, the rest of the games, you just kind of go through in your head, and you're like, yeah, no, there weren't that many close games. Yeah, because Oregon was really good. I mean, Utah, for instance, college game day, 35-6. So, yeah, Oregon was very, very close to doing it a year ago. So I look at this schedule, and I think back to last year's schedule, and at the very least, they're on the same level. I could make the case this schedule is more favorable than last year's schedule because the 2 toughest road games Oregon had to play a year ago were at the time 6-1 and 13th ranked Utah. They had to go to a place where the Utes had not lost since 2018 with fans in the stands. And they had to go to Washington where they were an underdog. Oregon's going to be favored in every single game that they play this year except for Ohio State. And barring drastic changes to Michigan, which I don't suspect, Oregon opened as a 3.5-point favorite, according to our friends over at FanDuel. And every other game, Oregon is going to be a favorite. And then the one game where they're an underdog, where they're, around +1 or so, the game is close to a pick'em. Because you can look at this sports book and see a line, you can see that sports book and see a line, and they can have those teams on different side of things, that being Oregon and Ohio State. I happen to think Oregon is going to win that game against Ohio State. I haven't made my official prediction just yet because August is for predictions, and gosh, I can't wait for prediction season because then you watch it all play out, and then I find out whether I'm smart and sharp or incredibly, incredibly dull like a rusty butter knife. Well, if it has rust on it, then it might be kind of... Might have some sharp elements to it, but you get the point that I'm making a plastic butter knife. How about that? So I'm most excited for all of that because the season is indeed so remarkably close. But last year's schedule at Texas Tech is singularly tougher than any non-conference game Oregon is playing this year. Boise State is the toughest non-conference game that Oregon has. They're the preseason Mountain West favorites. They are absolutely capable of getting the Group of 5 automatic bid to the college football playoff, which I think is a ridiculous premise. I think all auto bids for any conference anywhere are absurd, on their face, really dumb. The same logic that was used to remove divisions from college football conferences, logic I agree with, by the way, it's just not applied to the playoff. And we say, yeah, you get an auto bid. What if you're in a weaker conference? Yeah, that doesn't matter. You're going to get an auto bid anyway. It's all ridiculous and absurd, but so are many things in college football. So are there trap games on the schedule? Yeah, there absolutely can be. But do I feel as, I was talking yesterday on Monday's show about the schedule and kind of the other games, aside from the headliners, which are Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Washington. I think those are Oregon's 4 hardest games in that order. If you look at the rest of the Big Ten conference slate, there's no one on there that terrifies me. I mean, Purdue on the road on a Friday night, that has my attention. It doesn't worry me per se. Oregon State's a rivalry game. They've been relegated essentially to the Mountain West, which I think is wrong and dumb for many reasons. They're going to be extra motivated. Their fans are going to bring it. I just don't think they're going to have the team to be able to keep up with Oregon because the Ducks are a national title contender and the Beavs are probably, if you look at what their win total says on FanDuel or what I think they're capable of being given their offseason, they're a solid Mountain West capable team. Like if they were actually a member of the Mountain West, they would probably be, close to a 9-win team. They'll still probably be close to a 9-win team. I think they probably end up at 8-4, 9-3. That'd be my guess, but that's a little bit of an unknown there. So the schedule just works out in a way that gives Oregon a lot of breaks. Having Ohio State at home and Michigan on the road is a huge flip. If you're going to have those two teams on your schedule in the Big Ten, that is the more beneficial way to have them. The odds you can get both at home or have both on the road, I don't know how common that is. I'm not super experienced, of course, in looking at Big Ten schedules every single year. But having Ohio State, if you had to ask me, who would you want to have on the road? Who do you want to have at home? Regardless of the time of year. I know Ann Arbor in November, it's going to be cold and play into what Sharon Moore's Michigan teams are going to want to do to win football games, which is play smash mouth football and just beat you with physicality in the run game and such. I would still rather go to Ann Arbor any time of year than go to Columbus when the weather is perfect, like Oregon did back in September of 2021. So I think that's a major break. I think having a bye before the Washington game avoids the look-ahead factor when they go play Wisconsin on November 16th. That's certainly going to be a tricky game. And, I've said before and continue to think that's probably the biggest trap game on Oregon's radar, if it's flying under anybody's radar. I don't know how you all feel about Wisconsin, but it's a respectable program. They should be a bowl team. And anytime you have a team that is going to win at least 6 games in a given season and you have to go to their place, I've seen crazier things happen. I've watched college football for a long time. I know many of you have as well. Crazy things can happen in there. But Oregon's going to have the better roster in every game except for Ohio State. And they're going to have the better quarterback in every game. That's the statement I feel the most confident saying. I think the roster question, you could look at Ohio State, say maybe they've got more high-end defensive players. Probably true. Oregon might have more high-end offensive players, though. It could come out to be a wash. It's kind of what the betting line looks like, is it's, really close to a pick-em. Granted, the game is being played in Eugene, so if it were in Columbus, Ohio State would probably be a small favorite. But Dillon Gabriel, to me, in 2024, is a much more known commodity and gives me a high floor of production that is greater than any quarterback Oregon's going to face this year. Aiden Childs, one day, could be a Heisman Trophy caliber player. He's not going to be in his first year as a starting quarterback. That's asking a lot. That's asking a lot, even for a guy who has some mild experience playing in times where the game is still in doubt, which is what he did last year at Oregon State with DJ. So I like where the schedule is at. I think 12-0 is completely realistic. Am I predicting that? Haven't made my predictions yet. Just saying, the more I think about it, the more it seems to line up for that to be in play. And when you think about how tough Oregon's schedule was last year, playing in a really deep Pac-12, and how close they came, how dominant they looked, and how close they came to going undefeated with that schedule, I think they can absolutely do it in the Big Ten. You might have a couple tougher teams at the top, but the middle and bottom of the Big Ten, I don't know if this is the worst kept secret or what, it's really not that good. It's just okay. Like, the Big Ten is great because Michigan and Ohio State and Penn State have been great every single year. Those are top 10 teams and programs every single year. That's why the Big Ten's great. When you look in the top 25 rankings throughout the year over the last several seasons, from the 10 to 25 range, there haven't been a lot of Big Ten teams popping in and out. I mean, Wisconsin has, hired a new coach in the last couple of years because they weren't what they are capable of being. And Minnesota and PJ Fleck, they kind of rose up and then they rose back down. And nobody else has really captured that mantle of being a high-level, top 25 caliber, Tier 2 Big Ten team. I think there are a number of schools that can do it. I think two of them in the coming years are going to be the former Pac-12 schools in Washington and USC. So that's why Oregon can absolutely go 12-0 this year. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on X. Still more to get to on today's show because got a little Cruton talk. Something I haven't seen before. Might not be great news for Oregon. So Trey McNutt was supposed to commit on Friday. He did not. He has pushed his commitment back to August 3rd. Now, I don't know if this was confirmed, but I heard on another show, and someone sent me a message about, and certainly the timeline lined up with when everything was happening, that the commitment got pushed back because he was supposed to have some family fly in, but then because of the delays, because of the CrowdStrike I'm not technologically savvy. I don't even know what the right verbiage is here, but I'm sure everyone's familiar that Windows was down. And so that caused delays in travel. And so Trey McNutt was going to commit on Friday. Oregon was seen as the leader there. Oregon was also seen as the leader for DJ Pickett. And as I've gotten several questions this offseason about crystal balls, do they still have value? Or these prediction guys just making stuff up and whatnot? Like, they're still right more often than not. It's just you can't take the crystal balls or the on-3, 70% prediction meter as gospel, because a lot can change late in the game, particularly with NIL. That can be a big late mover. It's not every single late mover, just like every single big-time recruit that chooses Oregon isn't just coming to the Ducks for NIL. Every single late flip elsewhere is not automatically, they put a bunch of money in. I'm like, no, guys have flipped to the last second and gone against what industry experts have thought was going to happen for a long time. It's not a brand new phenomenon. It's just slightly more prevalent with all the new factors that are in play in college football. So the reason this was not good news for Oregon is that if the Ducks were truly in the lead, regardless of what the reasoning is, it just allows for more time for Trey to think about it, for him to field other offers, for him to talk to schools, for coaches to message him. He might have been locked in, but if you're the school leading for a particular kid, the last thing you want is for him to say, I'm going to draw this out. I'm going to, commit in a couple weeks. Doesn't mean Oregon isn't going to land him. I think he is an important recruit for Oregon landing a top 5 class in the 2025 cycle, because they've done a great job getting guys like DeCorian Moore and Dorian Brew, who they were not necessarily supposed to get, or they were not seen as the favorites. Their class has climbed on 24/7 as high as 4th in the country. It's currently sitting at 5. I think to stay in that sort of range, when you look at the number of composite 5 stars that the other big-time recruiting classes tend to have that are top 2 or 3 in the country, Oregon probably needs a couple more. They've got 3 at the moment in DeCorian Moore, Dallas Wilson, and Dorian Brew. You probably want to see at least one more in there, maybe 2. 5-star athlete Michael Terry, who we'll talk about in just a sec. that's another name that, just from a recruiting class ranking standpoint, I think it's easy to dive into those numbers and the rankings and everything and forget the reason these kids are ranked so high is because they're really, really good football players and they're going to be one day. But when you're looking at the rankings, I think Oregon has to have at least one more 5-star get into the fold, or 5th is probably the highest they could go, which would still be a fantastic class. Like this recruiting class is top 10 proof. I cannot see Oregon falling outside of the top 10 nationally. Could they be outside the top 5? Yes. What does that mean? 1 or 2 players. That's ultimately what it comes down to. And you might say, well, that doesn't sound like a lot. I mean, 1 or 2 kids, it's this, that. Well, sometimes one kid comes in and doesn't make an impact, and sometimes one kid comes in and makes a huge impact. Depends on the kid, depends on the position, depends on the year, depends on what sorts of injuries you have. So more cowbell is always the play in there. All-time great SNL skit. So speaking of Michael Terry III, this weekend Oregon's got a Saturday Night Live, which is this big gathering and just an opportunity to get recruits on campus, not just in the 25 cycle, but the 26 cycle as well. I've seen the number 1 tight end in the class of 2026. I believe he's going to be on campus this weekend. And there are a whole host of other recruits that Oregon's bringing to Eugene. Chris Henry Jr. is one of them. 2026 number 1 receiver and current Ohio State verbal commit. He's been committed since last year, which is crazy, but that's what it takes to get big time recruits. You got to get them at least on your radar, if not verbally committed, by the time they're sophomores, and then of course everyone else is going to continue recruiting them. But one other name that continues to pop up in Oregon recruiting circles, and I continue to see non-Oregon pieces written about, is Naeem Offord. And the buzz continues that he could decommit from Ohio State. If he does, it'll probably be, everybody will go after him, but it'll probably be Oregon and Auburn, is what I have read. That's a name that would be a boon to Oregon's class if you see a guy like Trey McNutt go elsewhere from both a ranking and positional standpoint, because they're both in the defensive secondary. That would be a great name to pick up. Like if you slide one out and say, nope, McNutt's going elsewhere. Like I saw there was an on-3 prediction for him to go to Tennessee. So if McNutt, if that happens, but then you get Naeem Offord from Ohio State, suddenly you're taking a kid away from the Buckeyes and adding one to your class, and you can start to push for the number 1 class in the country, which is not a requirement for Oregon. Would it be awesome? Yeah, it would. And he's certainly someone who could help Oregon get there. But that's the latest from the trail. And I think Oregon's still in a really, really good spot. I think their class has got a ton of talent. They've got a quarterback. They've got offensive weapons. They've started to build up the offensive line with a handful of commits. And I think we're going to see more players in the coming weeks on the defensive side of the ball. 16 commits right now for Oregon in 2025. Positionally, they go like this: receiver, corner, tight end, linebacker, offensive tackle, running back, offensive tackle, edge / defensive line, running back, receiver, quarterback, receiver, defensive line, offensive tackle. So about a third of the class are defensive guys. Maybe that's because the first 2 classes, particularly the 23 cycle, but 24 as well, were a little bit more defensive heavy. I just think with Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoy on the recruiting trail, those guys are going to have more than 5 defensive players commit in a class. So I'd be surprised if that number stays closer to 5 than to 10 by the time the cycle comes to a close. But most of these verbal commitments for the class of 2025 and the players who end up signing, it mostly happens in June, July, and then August as well. And there are names in August that will certainly be on Oregon's radar that'll commit and continue filling out the class. But they're at 16 verbal commits right now. I'll end today with an impromptu prediction and say they end up with 21 players, at least 21 players in the class of 2025. So between now and December, which is just 5 months away, we're 5 months from Christmas. Go figure. Between now and then, Oregon will pick up at least 5 more players, and I'd imagine at least 3 of them probably come before the season starts. We'll see how that prediction lands. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, go Ducks.